We've already enjoyed Andrew a good few weeks ago now, and so it's with a lot of anticipation we await to hear what he has to say to us today. For those of you who are not familiar with Andrew, he's the author of two books. One, The Value Crisis, was the first book, and an interesting comment on that comes from Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party of Canada. I'm not sure if she still is or not, but she was at any rate. And she said, this was an easily accessible and thought-provoking book. Andrew's second book, Our Second Chance, received comment from David Ethin, a professor at York University. And he says this, the book is about how our way of life destroys that we should value the most. The questions raised are of existential importance. So we're fortunate to have Andrew with us again this morning or this afternoon to challenge us on how we are living out our values in all the interactions and circumstances of our lives. So it's with a great deal of pleasure I hand over the floor to Andrew to speak to us this morning. Welcome, Andrew.
Once upon a time, so the story goes, Jesus was watching people donate money in the temple treasury. The rich put in large sums, but then a widow puts in 2 of the smallest coins available. And he says, this poor widow has put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury, for they have contributed from their surplus wealth, but she, from her poverty, has contributed all she had. Now, I know that as a congregation, we don't necessarily hold that particular book as being the ultimate authority, but it is full of some really, really good stories. And 2 critical things stand out at me from that particular story. One is that buried within that story is a fascinating concept which economists call the law of diminishing marginal utility. We'll get to that. The other interesting thing is that it struck me that, you know, when that story came to me, I probably heard that story or read that story since I was about, I don't know, 10? 9 or 10? But it's a story, and so it's stuck there. I'm sure I learned the law of diminishing marginal utility much later in life, but I had to look it up again to make sure I had it right when I wrote the book. So stories are really important. Our ancestors knew that. They weren't just making things up because they didn't know any better. They were using a profound wisdom to use stories to communicate knowledge. There's a lot in that story, but we're not going to focus entirely on that story today. You're going to wonder, what the heck is this? This is not something we normally see in a sort of a congregational setting and so on. This is a visual aid. This doesn't normally go with perspectives and sermons and so on. This is the exciting thing about today's talk for me. It's art. It's a way of visualizing something that we talk about every week here at West Hill. And going from that visualization can offer a great deal. Sermons based on stories and qualitative values, not really concepts that could be better grasped by diagrams until now. And so last month, I talked about the Enlightenment and how the scientific revolution had introduced these new principles of wisdom. One of the things was that if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. So numbers rule because we can measure things and use numbers to describe them, but we can't measure by number justice and freedom and beauty and love, so they don't really count in the world of science. Well, I'm going to turn that around today because qualitative values can't be measured. But I discovered that they can be graphed. If you can visualize those values that way, you gain a powerful understanding of how they work. And so my objective for this half hour is to give you a powerful understanding of how qualitative work. And boy, does it tie into everything we've talked about already today. So how did I make this discovery? It came about because you may remember from last month I was talking about contrasting numeric values, things measured by number, where more is always better, with qualitative values, which didn't really have that property. And I was trying to figure out stuff. We all talk about stuff. Is stuff a numeric value, or is it a qualitative value? Because more stuff can be measured, but more stuff is not always good. So I tried to figure that out, and what I discovered was this first little chart here. That if we take my number-based values over here, and the qualitative sort of human values over here, they actually do have a place where they intersect. And these are three different kinds of wealth. So, to label these a bit, virtual wealth is what we use math for. Math. That's the money. That's the calculations, the derivatives, the stockbrokers, the investments, and so on. All of that is measured by math and calculated, and in fact, wealth generated by math, right? There's the interest rates on our bank accounts. And over here, we have the human, genuine wealth. That's love and beauty and art and all of those things that we can conceive of, but don't really have a measure, a numeric measure. And right here in the middle, so we can call that humanity, if you will. That's driven by humanity. And right here in the middle is real wealth. Food, homes, cars, things that can be measured by number, but they actually exist in the real world, and that's kind of driven by physics. I know this is beginning to sound like a lecture, but it's going to tie into something really neat very soon. So the first little side note to all of this that's worth noting, I could spend an hour on this alone, is that the way we measure and the way these values change over time, if you think about numbers in a bank account, what happens to that value over time? What happens to the value of money over time? It tends to do that. Not just because of interest rates in a bank account, but also the rules of math end up stating that if you have money, you can make more money faster than those who don't. Money and numeric values tend to do that. They tend to have positive feedback loops. Interesting thing about the physics side of things, if we were to graph out physics, where will I put that? I'll put that under here. If we were to graph out how the value of physical objects changes over time, what do we know about food, about cars, about homes? They tend to go like that. They degrade over time. Again, the Bible's got it in there. Store not your treasures on earth where they will rot and decay, but in heaven, right? Well, here's the other, first a little interesting aside. Again, this is the one I don't want to talk about forever, but isn't it interesting how we consider these equivalent? Food, we exchange for money. But when the person gets the money, their value goes up. And when we get the food, our value goes down. A Nobel laureate by the name of Frederick Soddy struggled with this and said, money is not fair. It's one of the reasons why we cut up forests and dig out mining and so on, because physical values tend to go like that. If we can translate it into money, it goes like that. But I'm not going to talk about that today. What I'm going to talk about is another struggle. If that's virtual wealth, and that's real wealth, what does the graph look like for genuine wealth? How do we graph that out? How does genuine wealth change over time? I'm going to take you through the discovery that I made and how I made it. Again, we're going to have some fun here. Oh God, this is looking even worse like a lecture, Andrew. Okay, bear with me. It's going to get exciting. All right. Here's a little human story that we can all understand. Value goes up here, quantity goes up there. We're talking snow shovels. Right? We're Canadian, so we talk snow shovels. If I'm selling snow shovels, every shovel generates a certain amount of profit for me. And that's the same if I sell the first shovel, or I sell the 9th shovel, or I sell the 2028th shovel. They all generate money for me, and that could continue theoretically forever. Remember what I said about number-based values last month going on forever? So for a corporation or a business selling snow shovels, sky's the limit. As a matter of fact, sky generates business. But that's not the way we think of it as humans, is it? If we don't have a shovel, the first shovel gives us great value. I'm kind of weird. When I shovel my driveway, I like to push 2 snow shovels at once, like a little plow, so that I get nice, if there's not too much snow, it gets a nice coverage. So the second shovel is actually pretty useful to me as well. And if I want somebody to be helping me, a 3rd shovel would be great too. But one of the things that happens is that when I bought my first shovel and my second, if the store guy says, hey, would you like a 3rd shovel? I say, I'm not going to spend another $30 on a 3rd shovel. I don't need one. So what if I gave it to you for $5? Oh, well, okay, $5. I'll take a backup shovel. Why not? The more shovels I buy, the lower the value to me. That's the law of diminishing marginal utility. That story about the widow making the contribution, she had very few coins, very low amount of money. So the money that she had was worth a great deal to her. Rich people, as they accumulate more money, it becomes less and less valuable to them. They don't care about it anymore, which is interesting because as you accumulate more wealth, it takes you a lot more to get that same hit of interest and value. And I mean human interest at that point. After a while, an interesting thing happens if I keep buying shovels. They start building up in my front hall and my porch to the point where they become a nuisance. I'd rather not have the shovels. I'd rather they go away. This is what I also mentioned last month about this concept that separates number-based values from qualitative values and human-based values is this concept of sufficiency. I have enough shovels. More shovels would actually now be bad. Okay, so this was the leap I made. Values are going in 2 different directions while still, or the quantity is going in 2 different directions while still increasing value. And I thought, interesting. I know something from the world of business that does that. It's not even widely known in business. It's usually progressive business that knows about this, and they're called polarities. I was introduced to them by a business consultant by the name of Tim Arnold at a conference I was at, and I grabbed it. This was so exciting. Because the thing about polarities is they're used to describe things like what's better, individual effort or team effort? Well, it depends. There's no yes or no answer. Sometimes team effort is better. Sometimes individual effort is better. So polarities are paradoxical. They're dynamic. They're actually sustainable, because when you first introduce what a polarity is, one of the best examples they use is breathing. Oh, oxygen coming in, that's good. Whoa, carbon dioxide is building up. No, breathing in is no longer good. We have to breathe out. Oh, not enough oxygen. I've got to breathe in again. There is never a point where you have just the right amount of gas of the right type. We have to continue this movement. It's very natural. Forests go through this process of mature growth, and then a forest fire comes along and wipes it all out, and we get fast-growing species coming in and filling the space again. Everything in nature works by polarities, and suddenly I realized that all of these characteristics, natural, sustainable, dynamic, paradoxical, match qualitative values. You want a graph for qualitative values? There it is. So let's talk about that for a second. I'm gonna grab a word here that came up a lot today: freedom. Let's say we were to graph freedom. Is freedom a straight line where you have more or less of it? Well, it kind of depends on context, doesn't it? Because if you're living under an oppressive regime, all right, you've got an authoritarian regime and you don't feel you have enough freedom, and so you're down here. This, by the way, is low value, high value, low value, high value. So value is, again, on this scale here. And these are the two poles. So order, it's an authoritarian regime. I can't stand it anymore. I want to move into a place of freedom. So I move over here, where there is a lot less order. We can call it liberty, maybe. So now, at last, I'm free. I can do whatever I want to do. There's nobody telling me what to do. I have freedom. Hey, wait a minute. Why are you doing that? I don't like that. Oh, well, I feel like doing that, and I'm free. No. We have to have some rules here so that your freedoms don't infringe upon mine. We have to have a little bit of regulation here. Because right now, if we have too much liberty, we have anarchy, right? We have chaos. So we need some rules in order to have freedom. So we head on over to the order side again. The qualitative value of freedom is a combination of order and chaos. Order and liberty, and you will never get the perfect mix. You will always be in this movement from one side to the other. What's one of the other words we talked about today? We talked about justice. What would the graph of justice look like? Well, that depends. What is justice made up of? Well, right now, you might say that justice in the Middle East is stringency. I have to lay down the law, and if you kill my people, by golly, I'm going to kill yours. Because an eye for an eye, that's justice. Well, we can see what's happening when we have too much rigorous adherence to that kind of law, an eye for an eye. And what we need to see in those situations is a little more mercy. If we're in a courtroom, we want a judge who can look at the situation and go, I think I'm going to set aside the minimum sentencing rules or whatever it is that's on the stringency side, because in this situation, what's called for is mercy. But what if the judge let everyone off that way? That's going to be a problem, isn't it? Too much mercy. People realize they can do whatever they want and get away with it. Well, that's no good. They're struggling with this in San Francisco at the moment because apparently there's a new rule out there that you can shoplift up to $1,000 with no consequences because the jails are too full. Kid you not. Maybe there's a little too much mercy going on there. Maybe we have to look at implementing some of the rules that we laid down again. So, it turns out, when I looked into this further, that you could put every value in your VisionWorks document through this process. Compassion. Oh, no, wait a minute, Andrew. More compassion is always better. Not so sure. It's just a matter of choosing what you put on the two sides. So if I was to try and map out compassion, I struggled with this for a while to try and find things that would fit, but they are there. Compassion might be, seem to have left it off my list, but if I remember correctly, it was sacrifice and self-care. You could say Mother Teresa was one of the most compassionate humans in our lifetimes. She sacrificed so much. But if she had said, you know what, I'm going to give everything to the poor. I'm going to stop eating. I'm going to stay awake as long as I can to look after these people, the kind of compassion she could offer would diminish dramatically. She wouldn't feel the joy and the love for those people. She would feel used. She would feel resentful. And so you have to spend a certain amount of time with self-care and looking after yourself. Please put on your own mask before assisting others. We hear it every time we get on the plane, right? Beauty and art. Complexity, simplicity. What we appreciate about things in art could be as simple as the line that Picasso draws to capture Don Quixote. Oh, simplicity. And then you study the complexity in that line, or in a fantastic Rubens painting. All of these things move in this fashion. And again, we will find it in spirituality. Spirituality has this combination of omniscience, where many religions believe that there is a deity, an entity that is all-knowing and all-controlling, and personal agency. And if we spend too much time on one side or the other, we get lost. If this deity is all-knowing and all-controlling, there's nothing I can do, so it's pointless to even act. If it's all personal agency and it's all about me, what's the point of the spirituality in the first place? Everything moves through this cycle. An anthill or a beehive moves through this cycle. We are concerned about the collective good of the community. We are concerned about our own personal well-being. If every bee sacrificed itself, there would be no hive left. If every bee looked after only itself, there would be no hive. So, what does this mean? What about the greatest word in your VisionWorks document, love? Could we put love here? I think we could. Unity and independence. Right? What is it? The cypress and the oak grow not in each other's shadow. Everything moves through this. So what do we learn from this? What's exciting about this? Well, what's exciting to me is a couple of things. One, it explains dramatically why we have such a struggle with human values, with qualitative values. They're all structured by a paradox, by a dynamic thing that we have to move through. And it's not as easy as saying, you know what, if I want more profit, I just sell more shovels. That's an easy solution. Very straightforward, very linear. Nothing about our qualitative values is straightforward. It's this movement constantly back and forth. It's like breathing. It's as natural as breathing. So that's the first thing that's really interesting about that. And again, we could use that for anything. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a combination of forgetting and acknowledging. The other exciting thing about this is that this is a model from the business world, and they've played with it a lot. There are tools that they use to describe certain dynamics that you use to get from here to here. All right? So if I want to convince a bunch of people that mercy is no longer working for them and they have to be stringent, it's called crusading in the world of polarity management. Barry Johnson was the consultant who came up with the polarity management in the first place, wrote the book on it. So instead of saying to people, mercy isn't working, I think you need to be more stringent, it has this whole strategy worked out where it says, no, you go in the opposite direction. You say, you know, here are the good things about mercy. Here's what's really positive about mercy. And I recognize also that here are the downsides of stringency. But there are some positives to it as well. So instead of trying to take people from there to there, you go around here like this. All these kind of neat tools. There are also great theories that say you can't just choose one value and run it out to its focus and just accept the downside of that value. So you can't say, I'm going to have order, and I'm just going to stick with order because it's a lot simpler, and I'll just accept the downside of order, but I'm not going to go over here to the liberty and the chaos side. And the theory in business says that if you try and stick on one pole, you get the downside of both. So is that really true? If I was to stick on sacrifice and get the downside of sacrifice being hurting myself, am I still helping other people? No. I'm stopping to gain the positives there. So, to me, this gave me a visual for qualitative versus numeric values. And it gave me a test, something that a lot of ecological organizations are struggling with. How do we know this is the right step for taking humanity forwards into our next generation of existence on the planet? How do we know that solving this carbon problem or this climate problem or this sixth mass extinction is the right thing to do? Now I don't have to be an economist. I don't have to be an ecologist. I don't have to be a biologist. I don't have to be a physicist or a climate scientist. All I do is say, can you put it on this? Because if it ain't following something like that, it's not sustainable. This is the way the planet has worked for as long as we can imagine the planet existing. This is how everything on the planet works. And temporarily, you might have a rabbit population that seems to grow exponentially because, frankly, that's what growth means. Growth means exponential upward curve. Everything in nature follows that as well. But there's always a feedback loop. There's always sufficiency. And if your solution to any of the world's problems involves a curve like this or a curve like that without the feedback, I don't think it's going to work. So I hope that that gives you something to think about in terms of your vision works document, because now you have something that you could actually apply some science to, maybe, and say the things that we believe in, more importantly, perhaps the actions that we take. And I know that you guys are on top of this, because I know that in your vision works document, what do you talk about? You talk about your interconnectedness to nature. You talk about qualitative values being turned into action. And more importantly, you talk about the uncertainty of your wisdom. Because when you get to point A, you may just turn around and be heading back to point B at some point, which is good. Doesn't mean you've done something wrong or made a bad choice. It means that the time is right to go and breathe out instead of breathing in. That's it for today. Thank you.
You have just graphed why the third point, after acknowledging we're grounded in life and wanting to be guided by love, we need wisdom to keep us on that flow of that back and forth, the balance, the polarity, the dichotomy, instead of a dichotomy, a flowing balance between. So thank you. Could I ask you to put the gallery on the screen so our speaker could see the gallery, or right there, you could turn and see everyone. There, a gallery shot there. Just waiting. There we go. The whole screen.
Another one over here.
Oh, they're big. Their people are bigger here.
Oh, well then.
Okay, so just all together, I just want to thank Andrew for zeroing in on what's important to us and graphing it graphically and hitting the points that we try to emphasize and put into action. So if the people, if you could check that, if we could thank him from the screen there, if you could unmute yourself, and there you go, a visual there. There's so, and then here in the, if we could thank Andrew for.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Is there anyone on the screen there that would just like to say anything at all? Or I will pick one. Where's John? John, thank you for inviting this fella.
I knew you were going to pick me, Scott. Yeah, I think what a challenge, Andrew. Thank you for that today. And I'm still a bit behind, and I'm still stuck on sufficiency. I like that idea, the idea of sufficiency, and I think we could grapple with that a bit more.
I picked on him not because he introduced you and found you, but he was on the VisionWorks writing team this year.
Of course.
So that was good. Okay, please feel free. I'm going to ask Andrew to go to the screen if there's any questions after that, and please mill around and ask him anything, or just tell him what it meant to you to hear the things he heard. So thank you very much.